welcome back to the Unily Podcast. I'm Paul Sada. I'll be hosting you today. With us, as I would say as usual, but he comes and goes as he sees fit. Matt Boyd, welcome back, Matt. Glad to see you.
Good to be back.
I just want you to know Katie's angling for your position, so you're going to have to do better. She's really pushing the issue. She's kicking you in Kaz out.
I knew she would do really well on that design podcast. I watched a bit of the footage, and she certainly did a good job. So
she was
have to up my game.
Yeah, she knocked it out of the park. We also have returning guest, Mr. Glenn Chambers, my boss, your boss, everyone's favorite boss. How are you, Glenn?
Oh, you're too kind. I'm awesome. I'm doing well. It's good to be back.
Excellent. We're so glad to see you again. And our newest guest is Mr. James Heathcote. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at Unily. I believe I got the title right. Did I nail it, James?
Nailed it. That'll do. Yeah, sure.
That'll do. Yeah, my title seems to change daily as well. So we'll go with that one because that seems relevant for now. Before we jump in, I just want to ask how everything's going. Anything going on in your world, James, non-Unily related? Anything interesting?
Well, reforming socials. We've got bars back and open in the UK. So that's probably a landmark decision. Uni related, every day is a new dollar. Plenty of new challenges.
I think you're right about the UK pub scene reopening being a monumentous thing for you folks. Yep. I've done the pub scene in the UK, and there's nothing quite like it, and I envy you. Godspeed, enjoy yourselves. Glenn, what's going on in your world?
Well, I got vaccinated, at least the 1 or 2, so that was exciting. So, we can go into bars here, but haven't really been going except outside. But maybe we could do we need another American. We could do a drinking contest.
Yes, no, I'm outflanked here.
Maybe I'll be on your team. I've been here long enough. Me and you versus James and Matt.
And Matt, you're the who's the Frenchman who fought on the side of the Americans during the Revolution? Lafayette. You're the Lafayette, even though you're not French. We'll call you Lafayette. I'm definitely no General George Washington, but I'll try. Awesome. And Matt, what's going on in your world?
I'm honestly just desperately waiting for a haircut. I've had to do multiple video conferences and speaking things, and this hair is just honestly dying a little bit. It just day by day, it's completely a mess.
You do look like one of my son's Lego collection. Does that lift off?
There it is.
I know, right? Everyone's saying it, right? That's why I go for the 2 back and sides to keep it, give it some different shape. But yeah, no, it literally, I have the generic Lego man's hair, and my haircut is booked in for Saturday, which means the next podcast that I'm on, hopefully I'll be looking a little bit more
How
presentable.
exciting.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
I can't wait to see the outcome of that. Lego man to something else.
It's gonna be
well
good.
done. I had my haircut last week. We didn't talk about it because I told everyone avoid the topic as much as possible. I was long overdue as well, and I do feel refreshed and like a new man. So enjoy it. I don't know if mine came out good.
Yeah, I think it's looking good.
Right.
I thought when
it's a thing.
Mate, it's good. The design podcast. You were on the front cover of the design podcast image, and I was like, "Ooh,
did you see
how
how
nice fresh trim?"
I was fishing for the compliment, and I got it. And here comes Glenn with the hammer to knock me down a peg. But
no, I was just saying, you're gonna join in next week, and Matt's gonna have the Paul Sada.
Is that what maybe in reality this whole time it was the Matt Boyd, and I just jumped the gun. I jumped the line. I can't wait to see it. You got to send us a picture the minute you get it, and that'll be part of the B-roll.
Tune in next time to find out more, everyone.
Sweet.
There you go.
So we're gonna hop into the topic, which I think is a good one. I'll announce it in a moment. But it's funny. The hits keep on coming. We got word. We discussed last week that we won the Nielsen Norman Group, Best Intranet Design Award. We had 4 of the top 10. Huge for us. Huge. We've always done well. We've never done that well, and frankly, no one has ever done that well. We found out. So we were thrilled, and we're just really, really pleased with that, and people are glad to talk to us about, you know, what we're doing, and it's a lot of fun. But we didn't stop there. Reagan, for you communicators out there, Reagan released their awards, and we won again. I actually think it was different award winners this time, so that just kind of shows the breadth of you know, what our customers are doing. It's not the same, you know, one or two people. It's broad based. Do we know the name of the winners on the Reagan side? And I'm waiting for my producer to jump in. Wolverine,
Worldwide, JJ Keller, Baker Hughes again.
Baker Hughes
and
again.
And madly looking up.
Madly, yeah. We weren't prepared, as you can tell. This is professionally done, folks.
Someone else.
And yet we weren't
another
prepared.
Valued customer.
Was it?
Last
we already won
but
Commonwealth Care. Was it Samuel? Was it Samuel?
Samuel and Son.
Samuel and Son.
Which we've talked about on the podcast before. We really love Samuel and Son and what they do. We love what all our customers do, but it's great to see the ones that we think are really good get recognition from external groups. So hits keep on coming. We're happy about that. You know, again, great work, team. That brings us to our topic, which is completely unrelated to design, but actually, I think is maybe even more critical. We're going to talk Intranet Security 101, right? So for those of you who don't get the reference, you take a college class in America. They determine the difficulty level of the college class based on a number system. 101 is the easiest. So we'll come in at that level. So if you're a non-technical person, we're going to speak to you. We're going to clarify things for you. But if you're a techie, we also are going to hit on the things that we think are most relevant in the marketplace. And I'm so glad James is here, because I ask James these questions daily. It seems like, and he's always ready with an answer. So we have an expert, and Matt and Glenn will chime in with their stuff as well. But let's set the stage, right?
Matt and Glenn will just chime in with their little bits on the topic of security.
If they have anything to add, I mean, otherwise they can just be a pretty face. But no, I think they have a lot to add. As gorgeous as both of you are, you've got brains too. So again, let's set the stage. You know, one thing I do try to make sure, and I've brought it up before, is we always do everything in relation to intranets being on premise, because that was the dominant paradigm for so long. And the security things you do with an on-premise intranet are very different from what a cloud intranet provider like Unily does. So I do want to set that up immediately for folks out in the audience, that there's different kind of models for ways to thinking about security. And I wonder, James, because you were with us on our consulting business when we were dealing with on-prem, in your mind, what are some of the differences between managing security on-prem and in the cloud? And riff, you know, whatever comes to mind, I want to hear it. I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So it's the evolution actually of what's changed in the workplace. That's the biggest thing. And when we were looking back at cloud and on-prem intranets, way in the beginning, we were having to deal with things like the authentication layer. We were looking at it like Kerberos. We were looking at how SharePoint as an estate, as a platform, that was generally how we were delivering our solutions, how they were configured, all the dependencies that went therein, all the updating. We were looking at changes in requirements, new best practices, all these sorts of things. And it was entirely down on your interpretation, basically. It was looking up articles, it was reviewing, it was industry experts, but you were very much siloed. You were in your own little isolated environment, and you were having to make big world decisions and care about the real impact of every decision that you were making. And organizations, that skill set can vary massively. You might have an IT team of one or two individuals, all the way out to big multinationals. You might have 20 or 30 people in an InfoSec team, all with carved up responsibilities. And that's really that's sort of the challenge that you have is that real skill set and that discerning sort of abilities of people as to who's going to own those tasks and so on. And so when we're looking at on-premise and we were looking at those intranet designs, it wasn't just how the intranet was being hosted. it was who in our workplace was using it, how that was all tying in day to day with their actual skill sets, their jobs, and so on. And it was just, it's a massive task. It's a massive undertaking. And I think when you look at it and you consider the risks that you're looking at, so although it was on-prem, how are you making this accessible to your employees? You suddenly start to introduce more barriers to the success of an intranet than you are to actually improving adoption. And suddenly it's not accessible publicly. It has to be done via a VPN. It can only be reached with certain protocols and on certain devices. But you'd have to implement expensive technology to try and achieve that. Whereas when we're now looking at cloud, we're starting to say, well, hang on a minute, we've got real expertise, not just from our organizations, but we're leveraging the expertise of Microsoft or Amazon or AWS in that example. And suddenly their data centers, their IT experts, all of that knowledge is being rolled up and aggregated, and it's actually being passed on to their customers. And through that, we can pass it on to our customers. And it's that expansion of knowledge that suddenly is being rolled up, and that's the true benefit of cloud in essence. It's leveraging the expertise of all these organizations and rolling those best practices, but actually being able to implement them, not by deploying expensive solutions, but actually by finding the right solutions that fit your organizations. And that was the real trick. That was the real ability.
Yeah, no, so you hit on a bunch of themes there. And I actually want to pick those apart because first and foremost, the best one or the one that's most interesting that I think people can't wrap their heads around, which you kind of closed with, is by us being built on a platform like an Azure, we automatically get a lot of security stuff built in.
Yeah.
We just get it, and Microsoft gives us a lot of the resiliency stuff that is hopelessly complex in an on-prem world. And when I say on-prem, you may have it in a data center that you're leasing from someone else, but you manage it. That's really what on-prem means. And you have to hire a whole suite of people to handle all that. So that's one theme that's brilliant. The other theme that I think we're going to come back to is, in an on-prem world, you're using things, or maybe we should deal with this one now. You're using network security, which we use certainly, but in a cloud world, identity is hypercritical. Yeah. In the sense of, and what I mean by that for non-techie users is you are who you say you are, and the system can validate that. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about how we handle identity for our customers at Unily, if you would, because I think that's the starting point. When I have a sales conversation, I always start with identity because so much good comes from just managing that well.
Well, it's your gatekeeper. It's the entry to the domain, isn't it? So, yeah, from our perspective, actually, we made a conscious decision. Let's look at the standards out there. Let's see what people are doing and so on. And so for us, it was adopting ADAL, as it was in the past. It's now MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Layer, as the default broker in essence. There's loads of different ways of doing it. And then later on, we expanded that. And these basically are the standards, if you like, to allow you to tie into different providers for their authentication. So the generic one that we started with was Azure Active Directory. So for all those customers out there that had Office 365, unbeknownst to them, in many cases, they had an Azure Active Directory sitting in the background. And that, in essence, became the gatekeeper. So you could apply basic rules, the same rules that you're applying to your Office 365 to get you onto your SharePoint, to get you onto your Exchange Mail, that corporations were happy to accept. They'd invest in this technology and then they'd look at what was needed to configure it for their workplace. But then by having that single identity provider through Microsoft solutions, they could expand that through SSO. So suddenly you're tying in your Delve, you're tying in your Teams, and it becomes a seamless experience for your end users. So that was the key part. But then on top of that, there was obviously the big organizations and some of the smaller ones that wanted to go that step beyond. So they wanted to look at saying things like, do you know what, we want to put restrictions in place. We want to say that on my on-prem days, you can only access it from certain locations. Well, I can do that through conditional access policies. So Microsoft had a suite of tools, in essence, that allowed you to put those same controls that you would have leveraged and enjoyed on-prem and allowed you to implement that through conditional access policies. And that can be simple things from terms and conditions, health attestation on devices. So this is basically looking and saying, are you on a managed device or a bring your own device, all these sorts of things. And that was kind of the starting point. Then it got really exciting when obviously more and more third parties and different cloud providers signed up and adopted the same protocols. So we were looking at OAuth 2, which is again part of the authentication layer, and they're tying in Salesforce. You've got ServiceNow, and there's all these different providers that are tying into the actual application stack, and we're sharing that. The other key thing then is why stop at Azure Active Directory? Let's have a look at things like Okta. Let's look at Ping Federate. So we expanded our product set, and we basically went, well, if Microsoft are doing authentication and it's working for them, then what are the other common protocols? What's the common frameworks in essence? And we looked at OpenID Connect, which became another standard that was internationally recognized. And we suddenly opened up that portfolio of IDPs, identity providers. So for customers that didn't necessarily want to be tied to Microsoft, they had variations and options out there. And because it was all based on this common framework, fundamentally our product could leverage that and tie into it. It also went another evolution, which was about identity providers like Google, for example, G Suite, tying into things like Facebook sign-in, even LinkedIn as sign-in. So all of these capabilities all basically evolved in our product through customer demand. I think that was paramount. It was that flexibility, but all through this evolution, it was always the considerations. What's the impact to my identity? How do I make sure that the right people have access to the platform and so on? And that's part of our product team, that's part of our operations team, and the scoping. And so that's kind of how it's evolved.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn. You were going to say something. Sorry.
I was just going to say there's just so much that I get asked these questions from customers all the time. And I think that there's so many different sort of, what do you call it, insecurity vectors that you have to kind of secure it against. And I was just thinking about how, there's identity and there's everything that you can do on the customer side, because they bring their own identity and their own security that they're happy with, and we just tie into that. And then there's like everything that we have to do on the Unily side, and then there's everything we have to do internally. So I think I've just done, must be 5 hours of training, of which a good couple of hours of those were about security and all the common things. It's just so vast, isn't it? And I think my personal, what you read about, at least, I'm interested in your opinion on it, is that with all the best practice and all the security in the world, doesn't it always come down to individuals? Is that like the most insecure part of the
It is.
system?
It's the human part, which generally is where it falls apart. So, yeah, I think actually it's important to have an understanding of how we as a business kind of looked at that and treated it. So when I started with Unily many, many years ago, we were an evolving company, and we didn't at that time really have this foundation, if you like, around business practices around information security. And then overnight, we basically took that leap and we said, let's look at what the big organizations need and what we equally need for our own protection. So for our employees, for our staff, our contractors as well. So we looked at that, and we looked internationally at standards, and basically we looked at what are the big companies doing in terms of accreditations and so on. And so that's kind of where we elected to use ISO 27001, which was about implementing a set of controls, if you like, that make you think about all these things and make you implement systems and processes to protect you and ultimately lower your risk, so that those individuals that you spoke of, Glenn, that might just decide to dish out a password because someone rings up for it, suddenly the risk and the impact of that goes down. And it's that risk analysis that's core to the sort of the standard and so on. So we looked at ISO and we implemented that. And that allowed us to sort of cover the common threats that organizations will see on a day-to-day basis. And that makes you consider things like cryptography. So how we handle encryption, how we handle how we're storing data on resources. It makes us look at legislation. So it makes us aware of what we're doing for our customers in the US versus what we do for our customers in the UK. It makes you consider interested parties. So when we're looking at components of our product, how do we look at getting them updated? How do we look at things that might be evolving and new, better ways of doing things? So when you combine this sort of framework, if you like, and you put it into reality and into practice, suddenly that risk goes down, and you start to think about things like your user training and your continual assessment. So yeah, Matt and the team, I'm sure everybody's had a great laugh at the expense of the training that we've put people through to sort of find out if you find a memory stick sat on the ground and it's outside your competitor's office, are you going to pick it up and plug it into your laptop? That sort of thing. Well, people have joked about it, but actually it's brought into hindsight and reality, just that logic of thinking, well, actually, no, I'd never do that. But, oh my God, what if I did? Like the impact of that. The other thing is
those videos, I have to say, those videos in the training footage are hilarious.
They are the cheesiest videos.
They are,
and that was
so
almost deliberate.
Yeah, they're memorable. They're memorable because they're so cheesy.
I know.
Yeah.
You're never going to forget the message about, whether or not Sarah in accounting is allowed to share her password over the phone with you.
Exactly.
It was good.
Exactly.
It was good.
So it makes all the difference. But it's
Sarah's
also
always up
just
to
that
no good.
testing. Sarah's always causing trouble. So,
Yeah. She needs to redo her security training, I think.
She does. But we equally we test people as well. So we do our own testing. So there's bound to be emails that fly around asking for people to update their password online because it's just expired for their Office 365.
Yeah.
And these sorts of things. So yeah.
I mean, the technology is fantastic, right? Because, when Paul started off and he was talking about, big transition for technology vendors like ourselves is, moving away from these on-premise deployments to the cloud. Some organizations still kind of, in a risk-averse way are kind of like, don't want to go to the cloud, this, that, and the other. But then, like, when you look at the fact that, for example, the technology we provide, as you mentioned, James, is built on, cloud technology directly provided by Microsoft, and the huge amount of money they pour into cloud security on an annual basis, like hiring hackers to try and break into all their own systems. Yeah. Like, we'll pay you if you can break into our stuff.
Yeah, that's the beauty of SaaS, right?
It is the beauty of SaaS.
If you're a small company, then you get, the benefits that maybe a 10,000 person company had 5 years ago, just for your...
Yeah.
But
same
Matt nailed it
security.
a second ago.
Price of a cup of coffee a month,
Exactly. Yeah. Matt brought a very good point up, which is about that partnership. And that partnership goes in multiple streams. So as much of an obligation we have to our customers to provide security and to provide a platform that's performant and robust, there's equally a partnership back from the client to make sure that they've got a good stock on what their end users are doing, where they're coming from, and so on. What antivirus they've got on their devices, these sorts of things. So it's highlighted in something we do. It's in our SOC, actually. So one of the other accreditations we have is the SOC 2, and there's something called user entity controls. User entity controls, fundamentally, it's kind of an obligation, if you like, from what you are expected to deliver as a customer that's using the platform versus what we are doing as the provider. So it's simple responsibilities, like basically, have you got passwords for your accounts? Are they complex passwords? Because there's no point coming to us and saying we've had this incident where suddenly people have got onto the platform and they've posted rogue things, when you're allowed to get on to your intranet with first name dot last name with your password. So it's common sense, but it's amazing if you don't highlight these facts. But then in terms of that partnership, exactly as we said, it's Microsoft technology as well coming down to us. So Microsoft are constantly being attacked, constantly seeing these threats. We get a pop-up saying, are you conscious of this? Before we've even done anything, we've got all the monitoring, we've got all the alerting, the mitigations in some case. So there's news about, obviously, Exchange zero-day exploits. These are things that have happened in the media recently. It's taken care of. It's out of our hands. It's Microsoft's responsibility to keep their platform performant and secure. So it works in every direction.
Yeah,
so this is brilliant. And I'm gonna keep this around because this is stuff that I can now use when I talk about this, because I am admittedly an amateur. I'm okay with it. I understand the broad strokes, but you live and breathe this stuff, right? And so actually, let me back it up, because again, we're hitting themes, and we already covered identity and the benefits of that, right? Your organization controls the usernames and the passwords, and you actually create the users. Unily doesn't do that on your behalf, so you're controlling it end to end, and you're doing it from a centrally managed system, so you don't have to contact us in order to change anything. Your IT team just does that, and that's part of your standard onboarding processes. And then you hit on the ISO stuff, and I want to understand the value of something like an ISO or a SOC 2 Type 2, right? Because I say it a lot of times, and I understand it, right? I know what it is, but I want to understand why a lot of times when I say it, people just go, "Oh, you're ISO certified? Yeah, we can skip to the end of this whole process." And I tell my non-technical, my non-security customers, I'm like, make sure you're talking to your people internally about our ISO stuff, because that'll help them understand like what they're dealing with. And like, what does ISO actually mean at the end of the day? What does it represent?
So we spoke about the expertise of Microsoft being attacked and so on. So imagine opening that pool up. So it's not just Microsoft that are dealing with the exploits and the threats, but it's big organizations. And basically there's a consortium of individuals and organizations that feed back into the standards and basically say, well, what are the things you need to consider in best practice to make sure you ultimately lower risk? It's always about risk. So what's the lowest risk I can get? And the best way of lowering those risks is generally it's putting controls in place that bring that threat down. So a control will be user training. It would be your staff vetting. So when you bring people into an organization, do you want to check their shady past? Do you want to bring them in, and so on? So these are all the key elements. So really what it's about is pulling these best practices and standardizing them, making it a common set of criteria, if you like, that you can be assessed against. So weights and measures. It's about quantifying everything you say. So when we have our annual audits, which we do with a third party, they come in, they go through our policies and our procedures, and they really want to review and see, well, you've got your policies and your procedures, and it says you do X, Y, and Z. If I compare that to best practice, then yeah, that makes sense. And that's actually a key point for us. It doesn't necessarily have to be best practice. It's ultimately what you as an organization determine and say, this is what we want to do. Unily, of course, setting the bar where we set it at the highest and went, no, we want to do best practice. So we want to be using the best technologies. We want to be looking at the best stack. We want to be following A+ ratings on how we configure SSL and TLS, all these sorts of things. So when we roll that into our day-to-day operations, you start to understand a little bit more about how the ISO fits. So when you've got those policies and procedures and you cascade them out to your employees, and also you put in place things like having the weights and measures to check it, you can quantify it and you can actually see how we're progressing on it. So we, every month, are reviewing each of the controls that we have in place as part of the standard. We're making sure we're achieving what we need to, but on top of that, we're seeing, has it evolved? Is there a better way of doing it? Are we updating the policies to reflect that? Are we telling our users at the end of the day what they need to be doing? So that's kind of the reality of it and how it works day to day. But then why is that important to an organization? Well, it's important because it's a standard. So you can very quickly go, if someone has this certification and says that they're accredited, then fundamentally someone's come in, they've gone through the whole process of checking they meet the requirements. So in ISO, it's something called the statement of applicability. And it's basically of all of the controls, where there's 112 plus controls, it's basically about saying what applies to you as an organization, what you do. For us, everything applies. So every control has to be in place, every mitigation has to be in place, and then that's what's assessed. So as an organization coming in, we can expand that. So when we look at our third parties and we think, well, we want to partner up with Microsoft, we want to host a platform on Azure, for example, what have they done in terms of accreditation? What have they done in terms of security? Oh, hang on a minute. They've got ISO. They've got SOC, for example. So straight away, we can understand what are the requirements of these standards. And then on top of that, we can see it's up to date, everything applies, And all of those RFP assessments, all of those security questionnaires that we're having to do on a day-to-day basis, suddenly, well, hang on a minute, we've got the attestation, it's already been audited, it's already been fulfilled. So you immediately know, and you're actually reducing the amount of time that you're having to look at this qualification stage. And we apply that to all of our vendors. So we're looking, is the company ISO accredited? Do they have a SOC 2 report? And the SOC 2 is slightly different in the sense what we have in essence with our SOC 2 accreditation. It's an attestation. It's to basically say that we've actually audited randomly over a 12-month period all of those things that you say you're doing, all of those things that are meant to be best practice because that's what you've said you're striving to do. And we've randomly sampled it. And we are happy that 100% of what we've sampled meets what you've said you're going to do. And that's the important bit, actually. It's not just a point in time when you're going in and you're just saying, well, on this day that the audit turned up and they said you've got your ISO 27001 because all these policies and procedures in place. It's actually now, but we've quantified that. We've actually completely looked at your entire workforce, your entire estate, and we've seen that of everything that we've sampled, 100% of it is meeting the requirements. And that's the key bit.
How long does that take, James? It seems like that's quite an effort on the behalf of the auditor. I know, and you as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for the actual audit, they generally take 5 days on site, but then the actual information gathering, which involves all the different departments, whether that be HR, whether it be the development team and the product team, even our support team. So looking at tickets that come through and the quality of support tickets and so on. That information gathering goes on for weeks and weeks, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months to actually get the actual report back. And the report's generally about 67 pages plus in length, in essence.
Yeah,
it's a good read. It's riveting.
I've read some of the report stuff. It's actually, I mean, look, for me and my job, it's useful. I can say that the ISO and the SOC stuff here at Unily, when it's going on, either the auditing or, the evaluations, it is high pressure here because those are like baseline for us. If we can't do that, we might as well not even be selling in this space. And I guess that's something that's different that I want to bring it back is that's very different when you're dealing with a cloud provider is that you're going to be relying a lot on these independent assessments to determine is this a legitimate company that I should be doing business with, or are these some guys and gals in a garage somewhere who are, winging it?
We apply that.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the process for the accreditations is rigorous, but we apply the same level of rigor to the way we go about, building the product too. So, some of those accreditations talk about internal processes around our people, the way they handle data, the way it moves from one system to the next, etc. But at the same time, we do all of that. We have a product that we're building to the highest possible technology development standards, which is taking advantage of, as James pointed out, all the new security controls that are made available to us through the Microsoft Cloud, but also security capabilities that we can actually build in natively. One that me and James just had the pleasure of working on recently. Are you laughing at your pleasure?
Yeah.
It's still being tested, Matt. Let's see the fruits of our labour soon, and let's hope it's worked.
Yeah, so content security policy, which is that's some serious in the modern day that we operate, where you can share BBC articles straight into social providers, and information sharing is very much expected by your users. Content security policy will let you essentially, set an allow list of sources of information, and you have to specify, if you turn this on, you have to specify every single location that any data can come from. So this is some serious level Fort Knox security.
But that's where it's important, and that's that buy-in from our customers. So we get pen test reports through. We do our own pen testing, as Glenn mentioned, but we still get pen test reports through from clients that are testing their own intranets, and they want to be confident that they're as secure as they'd expect if it was on-prem. to be frank.
Right.
So we get those reports through, and actually, this is the interesting thing. The quality of the reports varies massively. And these are from big multinational organizations to small individuals that are performing pen tests. It's always about looking at what's coming through, how relevant it is, what the new best practices are. So there's loads of things we can do. We use things like HSTS, which is about ensuring that connectivity is always over SSL for a period of time. So you're saying you've hit this website once. I'm never expecting you ever to return a non-secure link ever again from this website. And we bake that into all of our websites. By default, it's a feature of modern browsers. CSP is the next evolution of that, and it's basically content security policies, exactly as Matt said. Well squatted on that, Matt. You did well getting up to speed on
Thank you very much.
Did he nail
Not
it?
just a pretty face.
He nailed it. So CSP is basically it's whitelisting your trusted URLs and so on, and your trusted resources. And we've baked into the product ways of doing that as well. So you can actually now in your organization basically carve out what you think is acceptable, and you can grant permissions to individuals in your site through the content management system in the CMS to set them up in essence and turn this feature on. Once it's on, basically if someone tries to put something in at some point that's not on that approved list, it's blocked. Simple as that.
Interesting.
Now that's not going to be for every customer. It takes a lot of work to implement it, and it might not be relevant. But this is all on the back of remembering that when we designed Unily, we needed to design it so that it was flexible and so that customers could go in and create their own widgets, create their own customizations, and so on. And so we gave them that capability. And then obviously, as time has progressed, it's like, well, now we've got people that can go in and suddenly start creating their own JavaScript on the sites. How do we protect our individuals? And this is the evolution of that.
Yeah, and I want to interject on that because so again, we've kind of covered the identity, what that means, bring your own identity, you're managing your users, that's something you control, and you want to do that because that's already baked into your HR and IT processes internally and your security processes. So we're just coming along for the ride there. Then we talked about the ISO stuff and how we want you to know that we're using the best policies and processes and training internally that you would probably use at your organization. So you can say, okay, these guys are using a standard that we would expect them to meet if we were doing this all ourselves. So that's great. You just went off on something that's really interesting, is that we really have to think through a lot of scenarios that people have never thought of before, because the way they secured things in the past was at times a little bit of a blunt object. They just disallowed everything. You couldn't do anything, right? And we've seen like the degradation of value when you just say no to allowing things. People don't buy into the platform. So I'm happy to touch that point, and I'm curious, James. Number one, because I do want to talk a little bit about innovation, what's changing, but how do we stay on top of how we build the product to kind of balance security with being innovative? Is that something that you have insight into, or the product team doing it in a dark corner under the stairs that no one is allowed to ever look at?
Well, we've brought them out from under the stairs. I won't lie. We've shone the light in there, and we found the product team, and
exposed the trolls.
We exposed them. Yeah, absolutely. No. So it's a collaboration. It's definitely a collaboration. I think one of the big things we changed in our organization. So not too long ago, we restructured the operations team. So we actually made it very clear the responsibility. So there's the InfoSec team. There's the deployments team, in essence, there's the infrastructure team, and so on. And so it really gave clear accountability within our organization as to who was doing what, and that tied in as well to what the product team were doing. And there's been internal restructuring as well for optimizations really, and what we're doing from our day-to-day business. But by making that change, in essence, has allowed us to sort of put home and perfect those processes. So when we've got some new stuff coming in the next versions, there's some new features that are being worked on. there's a sign-off process, for example. So when a new release comes out, we're basically saying that the InfoSec team have looked at it. They've done all the things that they would consider need to be done. So we look at vulnerability scanning, we look at automated testing, the mobile app, the desktop app, how it's all tied in together, how it's all ticking the boxes, if you like, from the InfoSec side. And our infrastructure team are doing the same. So they're looking and they're signing off and saying, I'm happy, the performance is still as we'd expect it, the impact to the servers is such and such, we've got the right infrastructure. Suddenly we need to spin up something, or we need Linux machines, all of these sorts of things. So there's that process. It's continually evolving. We were never going to profess and say it was perfect on day one. As lessons are learned, certainly whether they come through incidents where something may have been released as a feature and then later on we've moved on with it and we thought actually we should have designed it this way. There's that collaboration and that feedback. But equally, it's looking at our support tickets that come in and going, we've got pen tests that are picking up and saying, have you guys considered this as a capability? And they're not always relevant. Like, you have to bear this in mind. Sometimes organizations are very blinkered. So we have, recently we've had an incident where a customer wanted us to basically only run TLS 1.3, kill everything to do with TLS 1.2 and anything beyond. And actually we went back and we went, well, you have to balance this up with a SaaS provider. So we've got customers around the world.
Right.
We're looking after all of their end users that are using this platform, whether they've got an Android phone or they've got a managed desktop, whatever it might be. We have to consider all of these implications. And then you have to look at, actually assess what we're doing. So look at it, look at the practices, look at the results. So we can use a third-party tool that basically looks at how we've configured our TLS configuration settings and so on. And actually, it benchmarks them and comes back and it gives you a rating at the end of it. And we can say positively, we can say, well, actually, yes, it's got these feedbacks. Yes, there's support for older devices. But is there actually a negative to that? So we're balancing compatibility with security. Right. And it's a tightrope. It's a line to walk to work out when are you going to fall off, when have you got the right balance.
And you know,
go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was just going to say, like James touched on, like a couple of really good things there. The first word he said, collaboration, is one I want to throw out in a second. But one of the points he also made partway through there is, talking about, basically how we, as a technology provider and delivering a SaaS model, how we can adapt and change. So the great thing, again, about working with a SaaS provider, not necessarily Unily, but any SaaS provider that's providing technology which, needs some form of security, is that, when it's delivered in that model, they can update over time. They can continually march forwards with the new and latest security innovations and trends. And that's something you get as well. So, when you built your technology solution 10 years ago and security practices and best practices change, and you kind of, that development agency you used walked out the door, and you kind of like it was the latest cutting edge security then. 10 years down the line, it just inevitably will not be. It's an evolving practice. And that's why we have people like James dedicated to it, to owning it and leading it forwards. Just occurred to me, that's another great reason for going SaaS. But the really good point at the start there, when you mentioned it's collaboration, we've actually touched on that multiple times. It's like security is never managed by any one person, one organization in isolation. We collaborate with Microsoft, and then we collaborate with our customers when they have our product. And I wanted to throw this to Glenn, because obviously you must, first question is, do you interact with lots of clients, security professionals when you're speaking to them about potentially adopting Unily?
I do, and James does as well, obviously. I'm very careful what I say, but I think that it's very interesting because they always seem very upset and angry. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but when you really think about it, it's their job to go in.
That's our nature, Glenn. That's just
the training, isn't it? It's like, this thing is absolutely holy, everywhere and insecure. And you have to prove to me every time from zero that you are 100%, secure. And, I've lost count of the number of, Paul, you and I, how many, and obviously with James, but 300, 400 question security assessments.
I just finished one today.
know.
I just finished one before this podcast. Nightmare.
We're happy to do them, but I mean, it's intense, right? Isn't it? And,
it's incredibly intense.
Yeah, but I think
stakes are high.
I mean, what's the phrase? I think Glenn pretty much almost said it. Is it like you operate on a zero trust model? Is that like a phrase where it's like you trust nothing?
Assume
basically.
the worst.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's your starting point, and then people like Glenn and Paul would have to convince you.
The only good thing I'll say is that most enterprises, just like you were talking about ISO, there's other standards that other people come to us with, but there are more and more people are jumping on board with the standards. Mm-hmm. So although you start from zero every time, maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 customers will come to you with, pretty 80%, 90% overlap on the questions because it's common security standards. But
there's also the reality as well, just to add, Glenn, as well. When we were doing those calls in the old days, and there was always the request from clients, can you share with us your policy around cryptography? Can you share us your policy around vetting and so on? The reality is like these policies, sometimes they're like 10, 15 pages. Other times there might be 30 or 40 pages for like the real deep dive ones, like the secure development lifecycle policies and so on that the product team use. Is there actually a benefit to sharing this information? Like in reality, you give a client a wad of documents that's like that and just say, right, that's what we have in place for our information security. But in the reality of that, most of that documentation is actually about how we're implementing it and what people need to be aware of. We cascade that relevance of that information to our end users. We don't expect every employee to read a Bible in essence of this is what I have to do day to day. So we use our own tools like our intranet to drip feed and be sometimes a bit subversive and actually like most people are completely oblivious to the fact that they're signing and accepting a terms and conditions when they're logging onto their laptop, which is explaining that they're monitoring. So we're using technology and all those policies and procedures to really sort of quantify actually what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
Wait, what? So, the work laptops are monitoring us.
Did you not get the memo? You've been clicking OK every time, Matt.
Come on, man.
I'm joking. That was my concerned face.
So the pizza order I just submitted while we were recording this, that's in a log somewhere?
In a log somewhere.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable.
I know. Depends, did you do it on your work laptop or was it on your phone?
It's on my work laptop because I just needed to order lunch and
podcasting is hungry work, man.
It is, yeah.
Security makes you really, really hungry, and so you don't have to check the logs. It was a Hawaiian pizza, ham and pineapple.
Whoa! Well, Hawaiian pizza, that should be flagged under like complete like breaking the rules. Like get this guy out.
It's pineapple on the pizza.
That is horrendous.
All right,
you ordered it with an unencrypted USB.
Yeah,
we're not going to do this flame war. We're not going to do this. This is not something we're going to do because I will fight to the death on Hawaiian pizza. But anyway,
I dare you to call that company up and ask to see their ISO 27001.
Yeah, do it.
Yikes. Okay, so let me bring it back here because look, yay, we're number one. We're doing all the right things. Fabulous. Okay. But security evolves. It moves quickly. And, the way, things are happening these days is changing rapidly. Or maybe it isn't. I don't know. Maybe it's just variations on a theme. It's evolving. Is. Okay. Yeah. So we got to that. How do we keep pace? I know we were talking about like Azure helps us with that tremendously, right? Because Microsoft, and as a platform provider for us, does tremendous work, right? And if you were on AWS, they would be doing the same thing. We like Azure. We're very pleased with them. They do wonderful work, Microsoft. But how do we stay on top of things internally in terms of understanding? Because when you work, and this is just a broader problem with technology, things evolve so quickly. How do you stay informed yourself? I think I've asked you once upon a time, like, where do I go to learn this? And you went silent and never got back to me. Yes. And I was like, oh God, James wants to keep this to himself. But how do you stay on top of this with all the innovation, learning about it? And then how do we keep up with the product if we need to?
So for us, it's really about those interested parties actually that we spoke about. So we utilize different resources. So we look at the UK government agency. There's advice from the UK government that they publish through our cybersecurity businesses. That's one resource. The Department of Defence, there's NIST, which is another security standard that's out there. You're looking at there's best practices. There's things like OWASP. So OWASP is basically a guideline, if you like, in terms of common vulnerabilities, common threats, how that can be rolled up in your design of your application. So you bring all of these together, and you basically, one of the things that you have to do as part of the standard actually is you assess what's relevant to you on a day-to-day basis. Like, what are the things you need to consider fundamentally? And so these are sort of the starting points, if you like, and then they build out. So it might be forums that you have to subscribe to. It might be conferences that you attend. But then it's also in our own resources that we reach out to. So we spend a pretty penny on Azure with Microsoft, and a big percentage of that cost is security. And it's something that actually I'm quite proud of in our business, which is if I turn around to our management team and say, look, there are these threats, they're constantly evolving. I'd like to assess web application firewalls. I'd like to assess the additional DDoS protections and so on. Our management team are very supportive of that, and basically they'll encourage us to reach out, get the expertise from Microsoft, get the expertise from vendors and so on, and basically tie that all together. And we'll do POCs internally. We'll look at how we can roll that all together. But then we also use technology that aids us in this decision making. So there's something called the Security Center, Azure Security Center. It scans through all of your resources that you've got configured in Azure. You can add to it Microsoft benchmarks. So this is Microsoft's own created benchmarks as to how you should configure this. But then you can also add additional standards. So you can add NIST standards, you can add the ISO standards, the SOC standards, and so on. You can even implement UK government and NHS standards, for example, if it's relevant to us. And suddenly all of those different criteria are all assessed and rolled up, and they all feed back into the Security Center. And then Microsoft have something called Secure Score, which is basically an ongoing rating that they give you based on how you're fulfilling the configuration of your environment, whether you're checking your logs daily, whether or not you're monitoring all the resources correctly, how you've implemented TLS, how you've implemented SSL, all these sorts of facets, if you like. It gives you a rating. And so we baked in very early into our standards. One of the things that they expect you to be able to do is to quantify how successful you are in saying what you're doing and actually fulfilling what you're doing.
A+.
So, yeah, A+. There you go. So actually with the Secure Score, so basically you've got a percentage. We continually hit 90% plus on our Secure Score rating with Microsoft. And it became a bit of a joke. We had an incident with Microsoft. We were complaining about one of the metrics wasn't giving us accurate information. And so it was coming back, and we would raise a ticket with Microsoft. And actually they came back and said, we never see this. Like, it's unheard of. Customers getting that high on your security ratings. Like, we didn't think it was actually achievable. It is if you throw money at it. There is that decision. But also, we put the time in it. We invest in it. So we get a recommendation to say, should you be doing X, Y, and Z? We'll POC it. We'll see the implications of it. We can be very reactive if necessary. But again, we have to be bound by things like change management. So we have a robust measure of saying, well, let's test this. Let's go through it at the nth degree and make sure it's accurate. Let's get this communications out to customers. Let's get this rolled out into our environments and so on. So there's all these factors, if you like, that all come together. But for us, it's about knowing your audience, knowing what you need to be assessing and looking at, and just staying on top of it, Paul, to be frank.
Just grunt work. Go ahead, Glenn.
Grunt work.
I was going to say, back to the SaaS comment. I mean, we're outsourcing some of this ourselves. So, like the independent third parties that do the pen test, that do vulnerability testing, presumably they're doing their own research. They're changing their own systems.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, your test will come back with a new warning.
Yep.
That you'll have to go and sort of deal with. I'm wondering how much. This is. Not sure if I want to know the answer.
Are you going to be politically incorrect?
No, I'm just wondering.
I
was just going to say, like, how much of the innovation do you feel like you're ahead of it versus, we've got some customers that are 300,000 employees. We have customers in highly regulated industries, whether it's, pharma, healthcare, financial services, insurance, etc. How many of, what percentage do you think you're driving it forward as a security organization versus, customers are forcing you and saying, hey, we're not going with you guys unless you do this, crazy new standard?
I think it's interesting. So when we look at our existing clients, and as you know, they vary in size massively. We've got smaller organizations, we've got big multinationals as well. And as we spent right at the start of the call, we said how that can vary with your on-prem teams and so on. And that InfoSec team of 30 plus people. Mm-hmm. It's always reassuring to know that when you spend the time with them, we have conference calls and we look at such and such, and they ask questions, what do you do about X, Y, and Z, and so on. And we break it down and we look through it. And we're always met very positively in the way that we're handling it and the way we're assessing things. And actually, a lot of clients are quite envious of how fluid we are, if you like. We've had new organizations come in, exactly as you've said, and they're sort of assessing and saying, we expect to have X, Y, and Z developed and in place and so on. When you look at the reality of implementing it, you can go back very quickly with the justifications as to why you've made those decisions. So why aren't we just rolling TLS 1.3, for example?
Right.
And the techies will know what that means, and those that don't, it's basically...
I'll explain it to them.
Yeah, it's basically... it's how you handle your encryption fundamentally. It's the way that your devices, when they connect to a server and authenticate, how they handshake fundamentally. And there's different ways of it happening. And you'd always want it to be secure. Fundamentally, that's the key thing here is you don't want that handshake to be something that someone can exploit and jump in. And so there was known ciphers in the past. So the ciphers are fundamentally the actual type of the encryption. There were ones that had vulnerabilities. And so forever, companies are turning these off, and Microsoft will do announcements and say, Yammer is turning off TLS 1.0, 1.1, and so on. And these things come out and we get alerted to them. We made decisions a long time ago, back in October of 2017, that we were going to actually implement TLS 1.2 as our standard fundamentally. And then later on, TLS 1.3 came in. And on your point, Glenn, the big thing that we're sort of considering now is really it's new technology coming in. So it's how is all of this going to change? And it potentially is going to change a lot. And very soon, quantum computing is the biggest threat to IT security in terms of just having these capabilities. All of these secure passwords, these encryptions and so on that we had in the past, which would have taken thousands of years potentially to crack. Suddenly with quantum computing, all of that goes out the window, and suddenly those thousands of years goes down to being days, hours, so on. So TLS 1.3 is in place. It's basically a new way of looking at how that can be implemented to thwart these sorts of changes and so on. But those are the sorts of questions that are coming in on a sort of monthly basis, in essence, if you like. And I'm pleased to say that when you're following what Microsoft are doing, when we're looking at what Amazon are doing, then we're continually assessing that and basically making decisions from whether it be how we design our own authentication systems, all the way through to actually getting this rolled out to customers and how significant it can be.
So, and I want to bring, again, I want to kind of package some of the themes I saw there. A lot of the things that people are demanding are the latest and greatest, but the latest and greatest may not actually, be necessary in the moment. That's a message that I sometimes have to reinforce with people. I know sometimes I get the question because they're just testing my knowledge. I'm aware of that, right? But I also do try to remind people, like, yeah, TLS 1.3 is great, but it isn't necessary right this moment. 1.2 is pretty darn good. We see TLS 1.3 as something that we'll need to move to at some point, unless it's superseded by a 1.4 or something like that, right? That's another thing is I oftentimes see that the latest and greatest on these security standards can be superseded very rapidly because something wasn't completely well thought out with a standard. So that's encouraging that at least we're measured about it, because there's this mad rush to do the latest and greatest. And let's be very honest, security is a profit center for a lot of vendors out there, and they're going to try to push the latest and greatest to get you to buy it, but it may not actually be giving you additional security. I think what I'm
trying to think of an analogy, Paul. Sorry,
go for it.
I was just thinking about Matt's fancy Samsung folding phone being TLS 1.3.
Does he have one? Can you
totally
show us
unnecessary when you can just have 1.2, which is an iPhone 12 Pro. That's amazing. It does everything you need to.
I do have the fancy.
I want to see the folding phone.
I do.
Hold it up and type in your passwords. So
I had to go there, Matt. Sorry.
This is the folding phone. So like,
oh my god, it's a brick.
It is. It is quite wide, but then it does also open out like that.
It's the perfect analogy. I think you're
wow.
right.
It is the perfect analogy. Like, it's a nice to have, but the question is it necessary, right?
Are you more productive, Matt, because of it?
I mean, it certainly makes responding to emails and doing bits like that on your phone a lot easier. That is fair to say. It's good. You know, the other thing as well, this isn't really connected to security, but
a lot of the stuff we're saying isn't, but go for it.
The thing with phones nowadays is we all want bigger and bigger kind of real estate, right? Bigger screens. And the really nice thing actually is they get the best of both worlds, because the front screen is actually very discreet. So like, you know, there's not really like, it's not too overwhelming if I'm just doing little things. And then if I ever want kind of anything like bigger, I can just unfold it in a heartbeat, and I've got like,
But it would have been cheaper just to go to the opticians.
We went so far off the trail
We
here.
joke.
Yeah.
We went so far off the trail here. I'm thankful that this isn't live and we can edit it. But you know what? I hope we leave it in as a goofball thing. So, okay, we've got a few more minutes. One thing I want to do is okay, Matt, Glenn, here's your opportunity. You only get to talk to James one more time in your life, in your career, and it has to be about security. What's something that you've always had questions about or thought about, or you're not quite sure, and it can be as basic or as advanced as you want. Here's your opportunity, because James actually is leaving. He doesn't want to deal with us anymore. What would you ask the man?
You know, I'm interested, James, on a practical, you know, all of this stuff we hope is done for a theoretical attack, right? And we hope that, you know, there aren't people sat in foreign countries trying to hack in. Like how many threats, or I don't know how to quantify or ask the question, but how many things are happening with Unily customers on a daily basis, like in reality, that you see and have to deal with?
So we use something called Azure Sentinel. It's our SIM application. So it takes all of that information for all of our customers, whether it be their websites, whether it be their storage account, and it funnels it all into one single source of information. So we deal with 500 million events per day that goes into that system in essence. And then this is kind of that reality of why you need a big brother to sort of help you with that. So we can't really, if I was to ask my team to go through 500 million events per day, we wouldn't really get much done. So that's coming through. It spits out generally about 20 to 30 things that actually we do need to go through and assess in reality. We do get attacked. It happens. We get attacks on our CMS servers. We get attacks on our web front end servers. We have measures in place. Our team can look at that. They can make an assessment. We'll go back to a client and we'll say, hey, did you know your site, we're seeing this rogue IP in China, for example, or in Russia, constantly hitting your site, and it's not a request that we would expect. We're going to implement controls. We can block it. We get sign off, or we may do it proactively if you think it's going to be a damage. But yeah, those are the sorts of numbers that we're dealing with, and they're not small numbers. They're not small numbers. So yeah, it's using that technology to aid us with doing that, else it'd just be imaginably impossible.
Yeah, there's a lot of AI I expect. Threat modeling.
Yeah.
Over to you, Matt.
What's your question, Matt? One question. This is the last time you ever get to speak to James. Make it a good one. Don't mess it up.
But there's loads of pressure now.
No, I'm just the worst. Glenn went first. We thought we gave you plenty of time, and here I am just battering you over.
We can just play some music at this point on the editor.
Yeah.
Oh, don't, because this is going to make me look even worse.
We'll just cut to it eventually.
Do you guys have Jeopardy in the UK?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's going to be the Jeopardy theme song.
Yeah,
it's got to be. All right. I'll ask a question, Matt. I will ask the question.
You do it.
If I could learn one thing to help me understand, the basics of security and the types of things we deal with, and it could be two things if you think one isn't enough. What should I take the time to understand better to make myself more informed, not only as a pre-sales person but as a user? And I know we do our training internally, but what are the things that you want people to focus on?
I think point one is it's understanding the reality of the threat. So we spend a lot of time considering state-sponsored attackers. We consider people deliberately trying to take down client sites and so on. But it's exactly as Glenn alluded to right at the beginning. Your employee with the password sharing because someone leaves a Post-it note on their laptop screen. Unless you've got that whole holistic approach to dealing with security, then actually it doesn't matter how much money you invest in this. You're only as good as your weakest person. And that's the key point. And the other thing is really it's that assessment of it's all well and good saying we do best practice, we'll do the latest and greatest, but it's always that consideration as well as to what is relevant for the likelihood of what's going on, that balance. So part of the ISO thing, one of the things we have to consider in the standard is about risk assessment and modeling. And there's acceptance of risks. And one of them is about transferring risks. So you transfer through insurances and so on. So if something horrible happens, then actually you can come in and you can basically put an insurance or a liability in place. And organizations appreciate that and understand that. So it's always a balance in reality as to what you implement, what are you concerned about, and what do you ultimately need to train and cascade to your end users. And that's really this whole umbrella of making sure that is everyone aware of their obligations and their responsibility.
And that is how you ask a good question.
Next week, when you don't have all that hair weighing you down.
I know, right?
That's what it is.
Clearly what it is.
The brain power can't operate. It's solar powered and it just can't get everything it needs. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead. I'll let you ask the last question.
No, I still don't have one.
No, you didn't want to. Oh, come on.
I was listening because actually I thought your question was really good. So I was listening to what the response was.
No, it was a good. Look, it was a good question.
Hashtag worst panelist ever.
No,
I thought you was going to ask me about the 3D printer, Matt, but
yes.
Ooh.
Are 3D printers secure?
no, they're also a nightmare.
Oh, really?
All right, listen. This was fun. As fun as security can be, which is surprisingly fun. James, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I really think you took a topic that people struggle to understand and you made it relatable. And I really want to have you back because sometimes I just, maybe we'll have like James fly in. Security question of the week. James, are you there? We'll have a phone ring or something like that because there's so much that I feel I need to learn because I get all kinds of oddball questions these days and I'm self-conscious about it. So thank you for your support.
Is it also because, Paul, you're just going to defer all your calls and just go, there's a podcast that you can just watch?
No, that's the ultimate goal. I want to go, let me send you a link so that you can have a peek at it. But yeah, you got at me. Matt, Matt, thank you once again for joining us. It was good seeing you. We're looking forward to the haircut. Again, we want a photo afterwards. We want B-roll. And the one, the only Mr. Glenn Chambers. You know him, you love him. Thank you for joining us once again. It was a pleasure. And to those of you out there in the universe, make sure you like us, you subscribe to us on your podcast app, on YouTube, whatever it is, so that you know when the new one comes out. And we look forward to talking to you next time. Bye-bye. Oh, baby. Oh, no.